Chapter 5. Crawford wasn't sure he'd heard right. The what? The Blair Witch. Crawford rubbed his eyes. I'll be damned. You really did say witch. I thought I was hearing things. Nope. A witch, Crawford said slowly. That has something to do with John Lee Fellows. That's right. Or at least I think it's possible. Crawford sighed. Go on. Better I show you. Green led Crawford down the corridor to the other end of the basement, and a door marked Burkittsville Historical Society. The witch is in here. Not exactly. Green pulled out his key ring, fished around on it for a minute, found the right key, and opened the door. He entered first, flicking on the light switch. The Burkittsville Historical Society occupied a single, crowded room. Bookshelves overflowing with paper and volumes hardcover and soft lined 3 of the 4 walls. An antique roll-top desk was in the corner, and half a dozen display cases were turned every which way to try to squeeze the maximum use out of every square inch of space. Lot of history for a small town, Crawford said. This was a busy place during the Civil War. The guy who's in here during the day, he knows all about it. He's the one who told me about the witch. Over here, this is what I want to show you. Green was standing over one of the display cases. Crawford walked over to join him. In the case were half a dozen old newspaper articles and some handwritten letters. Green pointed to one of those letters. Can you read that? Crawford leaned over and squinted. The letter was dated August 22nd, 1825. Dear Mary, I am most awfully sorry to have to be the bearer of bad news in this letter. No, it is worse than bad news. It is horrible, tragic news. The Treacle's little girl Eileen, whom Madeline and Justine played with last summer, died a few days ago. She drowned in the very same creek where she and your girls swam, and to make matters worse for her parents, the body has not been found. Jonathan and I are spending every moment we can with them, naturally, so I am sorry to say that we will not be coming to Washington this weekend. I will write more as I can. Your loving sister, Elizabeth Branwell Burkitt. Next to that letter was another in the same handwriting, dated 2 days later, August 24th, 1825. Dear Mary, Jonathan would not like to hear me say it, but perhaps you are right. Perhaps this town is cursed. You were the one who told me about what happened here 40 years ago. Why the old town of Blair had been abandoned. And now, I must tell you of something that took place only this morning, which brings all those horrible stories to my mind. The water that irrigates the eastern part of our farm is from the very same creek the Treacle girl drowned in. As Jonathan and I were breakfasting today, the overseer burst in and declared that someone had poisoned the creek. Jonathan set off with him immediately, leaving his meal unfinished. I was too upset to finish mine. When Jonathan returned, his face was drawn and grim. The overseer had not lied. The water, he said, was oily and thick with a noxious-smelling substance. He had ordered the irrigation ditches filled, though he was afraid the crops had already been damaged. Then he pulled out something from within his coat and set it down on the table. For a moment I thought it a doll, but then I realized it was a bundle of sticks tied together, in the shape of a man. There were dozens of them clogging the creek, Jonathan told me. Oh, dear sister, I remembered then that horrible book you showed me, about that witch, and the pictures of the evil charms she used. This stickman, I believe, was one of those very same charms. I know you will think me foolish, but I have taken the red berries from the rowan tree we planted near the garden and strung them into a necklace for Justine to wear, as a ward against evil, just as the old women in Lancashire would have done. Oh, how I wish you were here so that I could confide in you further. Jonathan is so enamored of our house here, and the new town that bears his father's name, he will not hear talk of any curse. But had I my druthers, we would leave this place immediately and never return. Write me back soon, please, dearest sister, and tell me it is all in my imagination. Yours, Elizabeth. Crawford cleared his throat. Well, he began, then realized he didn't know what the hell he wanted to say. He looked at Green. So you think this stickman thing that happened in... Crawford glanced back at the letter. In 1825. This is related to the stickman we found in the grave tonight? Green held up a hand. Wait, you should look at this too. He squeezed along the wall till they reached another display. This one had fewer letters and more newspaper articles. One jumped out at Crawford. A full-page headline from the November 22nd, 1941 edition of the Washington Press. Child killer hanged. The memory struck him suddenly with the force of a blow. Rustin Parr, I'll be damned. He turned to Green. That was here. I forgot all about it. Green nodded. Parr was an old hermit who lived up in the woods. He'd killed and tortured 7 children back in the 40s. The details were a little fuzzy in Crawford's mind. He read through the press article to refresh them, but it was vague. The most interesting part was the last paragraph, which had Parr saying, "Voices in his head made him commit his crimes." Voices in his head. Crawford was reminded of Son of Sam. Next to the press article was a longer piece from, of all things, the Baltimore Star, the long-defunct tabloid paper his dad used to bring home from work. Crawford had fond memories of the comics section. The headline of the Star piece read, "Details of grisly killings revealed by Junior Bowens." Exclusive to the Star, the murder of the so-called Burkittsville Seven is, in the opinion of this reporter and many others, the most shocking crime of the century. A mentally retarded drifter named Rustin Parr kidnapped and killed 7 young children in the basement of his backwoods shack. Now an even more horrifying truth about the deaths has emerged. Over this past weekend, a source that must remain unnamed informed this reporter that Parr also sadistically tortured his victims before putting them to death. He cut those kids, the source revealed. Let the scars heal, and then cut 'em again. It was like he was writing on them. Crawford stopped reading. "Are there any pictures?" he asked slowly. "Of how those kids were cut?" "Not that I know of. I could probably find the autopsy reports. Maybe. Later." Crawford was thinking out loud. "So the stick man, and the writing on the bodies. You think it's some kind of copycat thing Fellows is doing?" "I don't know what it is. It's something, though. You were right about that. Something strange. Yeah, that's for sure." Crawford took another sip of his coffee and realized he was wide awake again. He didn't think it was just the caffeine. "What does all this have to do with that witch you were talking about before?" "They're both. The treacle girl drowning, Parr killing those kids, part of the legend. The curse of the Blair witch." "Go on." "It starts in the late 1700s, with a woman named Ellie Kedward." Green smiled. "Actually, Barnes would want me to tell you that some people think it goes back even further, to the Indian tribes that used to live around here." "Who's Barnes?" "He's the guy that runs this place. Bill Barnes." Green yawned. "Huh. Think need some coffee, too. We all through in here? Unless you've got something else you want me to see." "Nope." Green locked up the basement. As they walked out, Crawford bumped against one of the displays. A stack of newspapers that had been sitting on it fell to the floor. Crawford bent down to pick them up. A headline caught his eye. The July 26, 1984, edition of the Frederick Post. The banner read "Patterson in irreversible coma," and underneath that was "9-year-old son treated for shock." There was a picture of a frightened little boy being led away from an ambulance by a policeman. Crawford put the papers back. Green locked the office, and they started up the stairs to Craven's office. On the way, the deputy started telling Crawford more of the historical details of the Blair Witch legend. Ellie Kedward, he said, had lived in a town called Blair, which, in the late 1700s, stood on the very spot where Burkittsville was today. Kedward was accused of witchcraft and banished from Blair. Exposed to the harsh elements, she died in the forest. The following winter, half the town's children disappeared. People said the town was cursed, a curse brought on by Kedward, the Blair Witch. The locals fled Blair. Peter Branwell Burkitt bought the abandoned land in 1823 and renamed the town Burkittsville. In 1825, Eileen Treacle drowned in Tappy East Creek. Crawford had missed something in the letters and news reports. Treacle, Green said, had drowned in a foot of water, pulled under by an old woman who looked remarkably like the extant drawings of Ellie Kedward. In 1886, another little girl disappeared. She returned a few days later, a little the worse for wear, but the 5-man search party sent to rescue her vanished from sight, never to be seen again. Some said they had been disemboweled at a place called Coffin Rock. In 1941, there was Parr. The connection to the curse there came in the last sentence of the Washington Press article. The voices Parr had heard, the ones that told him to kill the children. They belonged, according to the hermit, to the witch. Green poured himself a cup of coffee and took a seat behind Cravens's desk. Crawford grabbed the chair next to it. So roughly every half-century, Green said. Something happens. The witch returns. At least that's what some people think. Barnes says those dates don't really work. If you look closely, there's always weird stuff happening in those woods, but... He shrugged. 50 years, huh? Crawford remembered the date on that front page of the Washington Press. November 1941. And here it was, 1991. I guess we're due for another visit, he said.